It began on a night when the rain fell heavier than usual, masking every sound beneath its steady rhythm. The city slept unaware, and yet something moved through the darkness with quiet intent. A single SUV approached the old overpass, unaware that destiny had already shifted its final course. At first glance, the crash looked ordinary, a tragic accident shaped by slippery roads and bad timing. But small details refused to stay silent. The paint transfer, the unnatural angle of impact, the missing phone, all whispered the same truth. Someone else had been here before the police arrived. By the time he reached the hospital, hope had already thinned to a fragile thread. The quiet halls echoed with hurried footsteps and low voices, but no one could reverse what had unfolded. Behind closed doors, questions began forming, questions the storm outside could no longer wash away. Unknown to the public, he had been uncovering something dangerous, a trail of money slipping through offshore accounts, disguised behind forged signatures and manipulated spreadsheets. Each discovery pulled him deeper, and each file revealed a shadow hidden behind someone he once trusted without hesitation. For days, he felt eyes following him. A car idling near his gate, a figure lingering in parking lots, a presence always a few steps behind. It wasn't paranoia, it was a warning delivered silently. And he sensed the storm gathering long before it finally broke. In the quiet of his studio, he worked alone, tracing financial discrepancies that grew more alarming with each passing hour. The trust he had built with pride was bleeding funds in patterns too deliberate to be accidental. He circled names, matched timestamps, and connected transactions that formed a silent confession. Yet, the more he uncovered, the more people around him began to withdraw, his manager's abrupt resignation, the accountant's early retirement, and security staff leaving without explanation. Trust began crumbling, piece by piece. But he refused to step back. He refused to ignore what he saw. Sitting beneath the dim light, he didn't realize the camera outside the studio had already captured a dark sedan parked across the street, its engine off, its driver watching with an unsettling stillness. The night was turning darker, and danger was already near. Traffic cameras caught only fragments that night, but even fragments told a story. His SUV appeared first, moving cautiously through the storm, its taillights shimmering against the wet asphalt. A minute later, the second vehicle entered the frame, a gray sedan with its plates covered. It maintained distance, neither too close nor too far, like a shadow trained to follow without being noticed. Investigators later realized the timing was too precise, the approach too controlled. This wasn't chance. The sedan mirrored his route perfectly, appearing wherever he appeared, disappearing only when he did. A silent predator trailing its target. And as the road curved near the old Brahmaputra overpass, the distance between the two vehicles suddenly closed. A slight swerve, barely perceptible in the grainy video, but enough to change everything that followed. When first responders arrived, the hill was slippery with fresh rain, turning every step into a careful descent. The SUV lay on its side, wedged between fractured bamboo stalks. Its roof was crushed, its windows shattered. To the untrained eye, it looked like a tragic accident shaped by bad weather and unfortunate timing. But investigators noticed something different, tire marks that started cleanly instead of skidding naturally, the broken taillight lying farther from impact than physics allowed, and footprints near the embankment that belonged neither to paramedics nor officers. Someone had been here moments before the authorities arrived, someone who moved through the darkness and vanished before questions could be asked. And inside the wreck, the missing folder and missing phone painted a darker picture. Nothing about this crash belonged to chance. The toxicology report marked the first undeniable shift in the investigation. Traces of a mild sedative were found in his bloodstream, not enough to knock him unconscious, but enough to slow his reflexes. Investigators cross-checked his activities from that evening. He hadn't taken any medication, hadn't eaten anything that could contain such a compound. The only object unaccounted for was his water bottle, later found shattered in the wreckage. Rain had washed away any residue, but the timing of the drug matched only one scenario. It was administered shortly before he left the venue. Someone had planned this with precision. Meanwhile, the sedative's origin traced back to a prescription belonging to his retired accountant. It was the first clear indication that someone close, very close, had crossed the line from betrayal into violence. When investigators brought in the accountant for questioning, the cracks began to show. His trembling hands betrayed the calm he tried to project. Confronted with financial trails connecting embezzled funds to offshore accounts, he insisted he knew nothing. But when confronted with the prescription tied to the sedative, his silence grew heavier. The forged signatures, the manipulated ledgers, and deleted emails painted a story he could no longer deny. Under pressure, he revealed fragments of a larger conspiracy, a financial consultant named Malhotra orchestrating everything from a distance, and two insiders coordinating withdrawals and covering their tracks. Yet, even as truth leaked out, one detail remained chilling. He repeatedly mentioned they never meant for it to go this far. A confession that confirmed what investigators had begun to fear. The crash was not an accident. It was an orchestrated end. Back at headquarters, the evidence board began to take shape, a visual map of lies stitched together by greed. Investigators pinned photos of transactions, offshore companies, and the gray sedan abandoned in an industrial yard. Each connection revealed a new betrayal. The trust he built had become a feeding ground for those who pretended loyalty. Lines drawn between names formed a triangular pattern, with one figure always at the top, Malhotra. Though unseen, his influence lingered over every clue, every forged signature, every unexplained transfer. But the chilling part wasn't the mastermind hiding in the shadows, it was the realization that the people closest to the victim willingly walked into his plan. The board didn't just show financial crime. It showed intent, coordination, preparation. Everything pointed toward one truth. The crash was only the final step of a much longer betrayal. The gray sedan was found days later inside an abandoned warehouse miles from the crash site. Dust covered the floor except for the fresh tire tracks leading to a corner where the car sat wiped clean. Someone had taken time to remove fingerprints, empty the glove compartment, and pull out the plates. But criminals often forget the smallest things. Underneath a crate, investigators found a discarded license plate with adhesive still warm, evidence the car had been altered recently. In the trunk, faint particles of bamboo fibers matched the hillside where the SUV crashed. This wasn't coincidence. It was a silent admission of guilt. Whoever abandoned the car knew time was closing in. They had tried to erase the trail, but the echoes of their mistakes remained etched in the dust, waiting to be discovered by anyone paying attention. The forensic team recreated the crash using digital modeling, simulating the exact weather, angle, and road texture from that night. What emerged was undeniable. The SUV did not lose control naturally, it was struck from behind at the precise moment the curve tightened. The impact was light but deliberate, enough to break traction on a rain-slick surface. The animation showed the sedan accelerating briefly, then veering away as the SUV spiraled down the embankment. No amount of defensive driving could have countered such timing. Every meter of the road, every millisecond of reaction, pointed to premeditation. The consultants watching the reconstruction understood what this meant. The crash was engineered. It was designed to look accidental, but science had stripped away illusion. Someone had chosen the curve, the rain, the timing, everything crafted to ensure there would be no second chance. When they raided the security contractor's apartment, the scene confirmed their fears. Half-packed luggage lay open on the floor. Clothes piled on the bed. Flight itineraries displayed on his laptop showed a one-way ticket out of the country. Among the scattered documents was a burner phone containing deleted messages, fragments referencing payment schedules, a car rental, and a final cryptic line, "Make sure it looks clean." Every clue pointed to one conclusion: he was preparing to disappear before the investigation reached him. His sudden resignation from the victim's security staff was no coincidence. It was a calculated step in a larger escape plan. But he hadn't expected the digital footprints he left behind. Panic had cost him precision. And by the time officers stepped into that dim room, his attempt at freedom had already dissolved under the weight of mounting evidence. When the accountant was finally brought to court, he looked nothing like the confident figure who once managed vast sums with ease. His shoulders slumped, his eyes avoiding the crowd, his hands trembling as he sifted through the stack of documents placed before him. Prosecutors laid out the financial trail: forged approvals, unauthorized transfers, offshore deposits, each page a piece of the puzzle that exposed his role in the conspiracy. The courtroom's silence grew heavier with every revelation. Even then, he tried shifting blame, claiming he acted under pressure, that he never intended harm. But intention couldn't erase evidence. It couldn't restore trust or undo the deadly consequences of his decisions. When asked about the sedative, he hesitated, and in that hesitation, the truth finally surfaced. The courtroom saw not just guilt, but the heavy cost of greed unraveling a man's life. In the final weeks before the tragedy, he spent more nights on the balcony than inside, scanning the streets below with a mix of suspicion and fatigue. The city lights flickered like distant warnings as he stood alone, clutching the folder of evidence he planned to submit. He wasn't a fearful man, but constant whispers of danger had worn him down. Cars that slowed too long near the gate, doors closing softly in stairwells, the same footsteps trailing him through parking lots, everything hinted that someone was watching. Yet he pushed forward, convinced truth was worth the risk. He didn't know the storm brewing around him had already reached its peak. The conspirators were no longer observing. They were planning. And each night on that balcony became a silent countdown toward a moment he never saw coming. The turning point arrived when investigators found his secondary phone lodged inside a storm drain near the crash site. Mud coated its surface, the screen cracked, but the internal memory survived. Once restored, the phone revealed a chain of encrypted messages, drafts he never sent, notes detailing unusual transactions, lists of names he suspected. One message timestamped hours before his death simply read, "I have everything. Meeting tomorrow. No turning back." But the most disturbing discovery was the final GPS ping. His phone hadn't flown out during the crash. It had been removed after. Someone had climbed down into the wreck, taken the device, and thrown it into the drain. The crash wasn't just staged. Someone stayed long enough to erase the last traces of the truth he carried. And that act exposed exactly what they feared the most. As new evidence emerged, the police chief understood the stakes. What began as a routine accident report had transformed into a layered conspiracy involving financial fraud, sedatives, staged impact, and deliberate destruction of evidence. He gathered his senior officers, laying out the timeline from the financial irregularities to the final chase. There was no room for misinterpretation now. The pattern was too clean, too rehearsed. The chief made one decision that shifted the investigation into full momentum. Every suspect linked to the trust would be interrogated, every account frozen, every missing puzzle piece hunted down. The truth was no longer hiding, it was simply waiting to be pulled into the light. And the chief knew that exposing this web meant exposing something darker than greed. It meant revealing how betrayal grows quietly, hidden behind polite smiles and familiar faces. Digital forensics traced several suspicious logins to a faded internet cafe on the outskirts of town. Investigators pulled hard drive images from the old terminals, revealing encrypted connections to offshore banking portals. Hidden behind layers of aliases, the transfers led to a network of shell corporations, all connected to one name, Malhotra. The scale of the scheme was staggering. Funds vanished in small increments, redirected across multiple countries before landing in accounts beyond easy jurisdiction. The cafe owner remembered only one thing: a nervous man visiting late at night, always paying in cash, never speaking more than a few words. These digital breadcrumbs were more than evidence. They were fingerprints of a criminal operation built on precision and confidence. But even well-hidden systems make mistakes, and every misstep exposed the mastermind further. The walls around him were beginning to close. Lab analysis of the shattered water bottle took days, but patience finally paid off. Under magnification, technicians found faint crystalline particles clinging to the inner surface, remnants of the sedative detected in the victim's bloodstream. The concentration suggested it had been dissolved in liquid shortly before consumption. This discovery confirmed the timeline. The drug was administered the night of the crash, likely after he returned to his vehicle following the charity event. The bottle's location deepened suspicion. It wasn't in the cup holder where he normally kept it. It was wedged beneath the seat, as if shoved aside in haste or panic. Someone had tampered with his belongings while he performed on stage. And the more investigators pieced together, the clearer it became. Every step leading to the crash had been engineered long before he entered the highway. A break came when enhanced surveillance footage revealed the hooded figure entering a rented sedan just minutes before following the SUV onto the highway. Though his face was hidden, his posture and gait matched the dismissed security contractor. Rental records showed he paid with cash, using a forged ID traced back to Malhotra's network. The timing, the route, and the rental location all aligned perfectly with the night of the crash. Investigators compared the silhouette to older footage from the victim's residence. The match was undeniable. His wasn't just a hired driver, it was someone who once held the responsibility of protecting the very man he now hunted. Betrayal rarely felt this literal. The surveillance image captured more than a suspect. It captured the moment loyalty stepped aside for greed, leading to the tragic end that followed. When both the accountant and the contractor were placed in custody, investigators observed a new pattern, a tension between them sharper than fear. During visitation hours, they avoided eye contact, each afraid the other would confess first. Their silence inside those glass partitions was more revealing than any statement. Prosecutors increased pressure, presenting each suspect with evidence implicating the other. The accountant broke first, revealing partial details about the financial scheme. The contractor soon followed, but his version of events emphasized one thing: Malhotra orchestrated everything from the beginning. Their testimonies clashed, but both pointed upward toward the same ghost-like man pulling strings from afar. The machinery of betrayal was now fully exposed. Yet the mastermind remained beyond reach, leaving investigators to wonder how many more steps he had planned before everything fell apart. Search efforts for Malhotra intensified as investigators traced his last known movements across cities and border checkpoints. Red markers covered the map, hotel receipts, ATM withdrawals, local taxi fares, showing a man constantly moving, never staying long enough to leave a clear trail. His route eventually curved toward the border, where he vanished from official records. Interpol alerts were issued, but no flight manifests listed his name or aliases. Investigators speculated he used land routes, slipping across unnoticed through remote crossings known to smugglers. Each red marker represented not only movement but intention, a carefully executed escape plan crafted long before the crash. Yet, even as he ran, one detail kept surfacing: he underestimated the loyalty circle around him. Those he manipulated were now turning against him, revealing pieces of a puzzle he believed he had perfectly hidden. Inside a sealed evidence box, investigators found what would become the most critical breakthrough: an encrypted USB recovered from the contractor's apartment. After days of digital decoding, the files finally opened. Inside were scan ledgers, offshore account keys, and communication logs linking every suspect, including Malhotra, to the embezzlement network. But the most damning file was one labeled Final Solution. It contained a detailed timeline outlining the plan to stage the crash, including locations, timing, and instructions to retrieve the victim's phone afterward. The cold precision of each step removed all doubt. This was not a crime of panic. It was a blueprint for murder disguised as misfortune. With this evidence, prosecutors had everything they needed. And for the first time, the conspirators realized there was no path left to escape accountability. The trial drew national attention, the courtroom filled with reporters eager to capture every moment of the unfolding truth. Prosecutors presented the timeline meticulously, the forged signatures, the sedative, the sedan, the staged crash, the destroyed evidence. Witnesses from the trust testified about suspicious behaviors, late-night meetings, and unexplained resignations. Digital experts demonstrated how the conspiracy threaded through offshore accounts. When the verdict was read, the room fell into heavy silence. All conspirators were found guilty. Their faces reflected the collapse of carefully constructed lies. Justice, slow and deliberate, had finally arrived. But even in victory, there was an emptiness. The mastermind remained at large, a ghost the law had yet to catch. Still, the truth stood unveiled before the world, offering closure to a tragedy built entirely upon greed and betrayal. The overpass where the tragedy occurred became a place of remembrance. People gathered with candles, flowers, and handwritten notes, each message expressing grief, admiration, or anger at the injustice. The site transformed from a symbol of loss into a quiet reminder of how trust can be shattered by the very hands meant to protect it. Families, fans, and even strangers paused to reflect on the life taken too soon and the darkness exposed in its aftermath. The memorial lights flickered each night, casting soft illumination over the hillside where the SUV once lay. Justice had been served in part, but the emptiness left behind could never fully be filled. Yet the collective grief also carried a message that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find its way to the surface. At a press briefing, senior officers announced that the search for Malhotra had expanded internationally. What began as a local fraud case had evolved into a global pursuit involving foreign agencies and financial crime units. Investigators revealed images of border crossings, flight routes, and surveillance footage showing the mastermind slipping through nations with practiced ease. But with every public announcement, his world shrank. His name appeared on international lists, his accounts frozen, his movements restricted. For a man who once manipulated millions undetected, he now found himself cornered by the very systems he believed he could outsmart. The pursuit would continue, officials promised, until justice reached every person responsible. And in that steady resolve, the city found a measure of closure, knowing the story wasn't over, but justice was moving forward one step at a time. As the sun set over the city months later, the landscape felt quieter, calmer, as if the storm that once roared had finally drifted away. Investigators closed the case with every conspirator behind bars except the ones still on the run. But the truth had been uncovered, piece by piece, through sleepless nights and relentless pursuit. The tragedy that began on a rainy highway became a lesson carved into the city's memory, that betrayal often comes not from enemies, but from those welcomed into our trust. His life, dedicated to helping others, was stolen by people blinded by greed. Yet justice prevailed, proving that lies crumble no matter how carefully they're built. In the fading light, one truth remained crystal clear. In a world full of shadows, it is the courage to reveal them that defines the final victory.